Hello, everybody. This is Board Game Chats. I'm Myron.
And I'm Chris. Hello, Myron. How are you today?
Hey, what's up, Chris? I'm good.
Good.
I jumped the gun there. I had coffee.
That's all right. That's all right. You had coffee. Yes, the coffee's kicked in. So since the last show, you and I got together and we played some games. We got together for Family Day, and the fam and I and you and I got together. We played Nemesis, a rather epic game of Nemesis.
Yeah.
And I was quite proud of you because that was a good 4.5 hours of game.
It was.
Yeah, you stayed through the whole thing. You didn't fall asleep. There was no whining.
Yes, no irritability. I didn't become dysregulated, as they say in the business psychology when dealing with people who have ADHD. I really enjoyed it. Like, I got into the character. It was very like a game that we're probably going to talk about very, very shortly from now. But I liked it because I got into the character. It made sense to me. And even though my character died, like the ship exploded, but I was the captain. And like my hidden mission was to be the last survivor to get to Earth. And so on the ship, I was the last person on the ship, but the ship exploded. It did not get to Earth. It was awesome. Yeah. I thought it was awesome.
It was pretty epic. The last scene of our particular movie was Captain Myron on the bridge looking out at the stars just as the ship blows up. It was quite epic.
Yeah, slow motion. You know.
But anyway, we're not here to talk about the games that we played. Today we want to talk with our guest. And our guest is someone that we're really excited about. He is a designer, a game designer and a publisher. He designed one of the games that was one of the first games that you and I played together.
Yeah.
A game that I was fairly certain you were going to love, and you did and do, and so do I. It's one that Sherry and I play quite a bit. We love. Our guest is Keith Matejka. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Oh, we're good.
Awesome.
It's so great for you to join us. We are absolutely thrilled. If it hasn't shown so much leading up to it, we are big fanboys of Role Player, of Thunderworks, and of you particularly. Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about yourself? Sure. You know, who you are and what you do.
Who is this guy, right?
For people that don't know.
Yeah. My name is Keith Matejka. I reside in Madison, Wisconsin, the snowy state of Madison, Wisconsin, and
Badgers,
which has a ton of the gaming culture in this town is pretty crazy, like with all the roots of D&D nearby and all this stuff. But anyway, I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. I run a small board game publishing, card game publishing company called Thunderworks Games. Founded in 2013, and it was a side thing for a long time in which like I worked in video games for 15 years ahead of doing board games full time, and then I was doing board game kind of on the side when I was still working in video games, and then I did a handful of projects, including my first game that I published was Bullfrogs. There's a game called Blend Off. I did a small dice rolling game. And then the one that I'm probably most well known for is Role Player, and then that's kind of spawned this a wide variety of titles due to the success of Role Player, and then I was able to kind of go full time. Actually, at the point in which I ran a Kickstarter for the first expansion for Role Player was kind of like the decision point to be able to do that. But so we've grown over the last. More in the last 4 years, you know, I now kind of have a small warehouse, and I hired my wife 2 years ago, and then I hired a third employee this year by the name of Craig Dennison, who does like project management, basically does all the numbers and stuff, so I can kind of get back to creating. So Thunderworks, traditionally, I do publish about half of my own titles, like designed, and then half titles designed by other designers. So it's always like a mix of me working on my own designs and me kind of getting other people's designs ready for publication and stuff. So anyway, that's what I do. You know, I live and breathe board games in many, many ways, not only in kind of the design space, but also publishing and sales and marketing and all that stuff. So that's the micro me, I guess.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you worked in video games for quite a while, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. It's interesting.
What did you do?
I worked first on the publishing side. I worked at Konami Digital Entertainment in Northern California. I started there. I went to school for music and music recording, and then I worked in a recording studio in Menlo Park, California, which is in Northern California in the Bay Area. And then I was like, I'm not making any money, and I got all these bills, so I got to find a job. So I always just go. It's a surprising course of events, right?
Yeah. I'm out of school. I got to work.
Yeah. So I just started. Back in the day, people used to get jobs on Monster.com.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And I applied for a QA position, like a video game testing position, so I started at Konami. Like, they had a Frogger game they were working on, and they needed bodies, and I was a warm body, so I got the gig. They asked me to start working like the same day I interviewed, so it was like they were desperate for people, and I just worked my way up there, I worked on their music games for a long time. I used to work on a series called Karaoke Revolution, which is like and we did like 7 or 8 of those games. It was crazy. That was from a publisher perspective, So I was working with the developer, working with marketing, working with the sales guys, and ladies, obviously. And then at some point, I left there, or my projects were kind of over, and I had moved. And then I moved to start working for a developer, which was Raven Software, who are here in Middleton, Wisconsin. So that was like, now I'm working with programmers and artists and level designers, and
that's like Marvel Ultimate Alliance or that kind of stuff, right? Yeah.
So they did. Those were the games that I was familiar with when I started working there that they had done. I started working on Wolfenstein, one of the Wolfenstein games I did.
Oh, I loved Wolfenstein, yeah.
And the Wolverine game that came out with the movie. And then we were working on Call of Duty, helping out our parent company Activision with Call of Duty titles for, I don't know, like 6 Call of Duties or something like that. So they all kind of blend together, but
sure.
I was working as a producer there. So that's kind of like project management. For a while, I kind of had my single player teams who were in charge of a single player level that I would like help organize them and get them on schedule, and remove blockers so they can keep working, kind of stuff. And then I moved into kind of managing the artists that were building weapons, guns, and vehicles, which are kind of the superstars of those games,
right?
And did some helping with the outsourcing stuff. So I was, I loved my job in video games, but the idea of like running my own company, making board games seemed pretty awesome. So it was kind of a scary moment for like making that jump. Like, I'd never taken a risk that big before. So after 6 months of planning, I eventually did it.
Right now, like, it seems like from a studio perspective, you're essentially like on all sides of it. Like, first working in the publisher side, so I'm assuming that your teams did a lot of certification and stuff like that, and making sure that it was like ready to ship, and being on the producer side and like actually like going from like idea to like actually getting it out. And I know this is going forward a little bit, but when you created your company during that 6 months, do you feel that gave you like an edge in how to scale a business and like what to set up first and how to get it actually out the door? Did that help at all?
100%, right? So, I help manage these multi-million-dollar projects. Like, my little $50,000 first Kickstarter, I was able to kind of, use a lot of those same skills. Right. On a day-to-day basis, I'd be working with artists to get, I get like asset lists together, and telling like, hey, we need these 5 weapons or these 5 like character parts, or we need a chair or something. And it's very similar to board games. Like, all right, I've got this deck of 52 cards that I need these assets. And then it's like reaching out to outsourcing artists to do those jobs. So there's a lot of like the production piece of like getting the product done was like definitely a lot of those skills came over. I'd never started a company before. So like, you know, I didn't have a whole lot of experience there. And I mean, I still, as my company grows, you know, I look back and then at how it's grown so far, and it seems so logical that it followed this path. But when I'm walking down that path, I feel like I'm, you know, bumping around in the dark, you know?
Right.
But yeah, so that was kind of like the start of it. It's been interesting because, you know, just scaling the company up. So initially, my goal was to like, you know, I like to make goals for myself. Everybody should probably do that. But to like I was watching the who are those guys that do like Snow Tales and Savannah Tales and that game with the big wave. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but they had this thing where they would do one game per year.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, that seems like a model that I could adopt and potentially succeed with. Let's work on one game a year. And then, you know, then it becomes, well, I could probably do 2 games a year. And now it's like, well, 3 or 4 games a year seems possible. So I like to have lots of plates spinning. You know, I like to be, you know, have a lot of different things going at the same time. So that's kind of like where I'm at right now. We're like 3 or 4 games a year. And I think that's like where we're at scaled wise. And like I look at, you know, I look at the companies that are kind of bigger than me. I look at like the leader games out there, and I look at, you know, what Stonemaier is doing, and I look at what other kind of medium sized publishers are doing. And I mean, I think that's been one of my keys to success, of like looking at what my friends are doing or what other people who I admire in the industry are doing, and basically copy all the things that they succeeded with and try to avoid the things that they messed up on. You know?
Right. No, that sounds great. So your first game was Bullfrogs?
Mm-hmm.
Was that a Kickstarter? Did you kickstart that one? That was the first game, first Kickstarter.
Yeah, the only games I've done that have not been Kickstarter. The first one was Cartographers, was not a Kickstarter. That was my first straight to retail title, and then Cape May earlier in 2021, and then 10 Penny Parks, which is about to come out at the end of March. So basically for Kickstarter, I was looking at James Matthew from Minion Games, who's no longer with us, but him and Jamie Stonemaier from Stonemaier Games. Stegmaier, sorry.
Stegmaier, yeah.
Yeah. So James Matthew from Minion Games and Jamie from Stonemaier Games, they were putting out these blogs where they were like tell-alls. They're like, this is how you do all this cool stuff. And I just read all that stuff and I absorbed as much as I could. And I was scared to take my design to a publisher because rejection is scary. And I saw them doing it and I said, wow, this doesn't seem so hard. I could probably do this, you know, like the arrogance of ignorance, you know? So so that's what I did. I had a game I designed actually before Bullfrogs that was like really big, had lots of miniatures. And of course, me being a first-time creator, I like took a hard look at it and said, I don't know what the likelihood of this being successful is going to be. And it's going to be like, I feel like I'm biting off more than I can chew. So I kind of shelved that game and I started working on the small Bullfrogs game, which came from an inspiration of playing Reiner Knizia's Battle Line and saying, I love this play a card, draw a card mechanic. Like it's always been one of my favorite games, but I hadn't played it in a long time. And I played it on my regular game night, and I was like, this game is awesome, you know? And I started thinking about what if I wanted to do a play a card, draw a card mechanic game, what would it be like? Where would I deviate? So I was like, what does a 4-player version of that look like? And then like that game came out of just playtesting and trying out different things, trying to have a restriction of like, keep it to 1 deck of cards and a handful of bits in a small box. That's a project that I could get done.
Right. Because of affordability, I imagine, is why you're trying to do that.
The risk is a lot lower, right?
Right.
I don't need, $200,000 to get production off the ground of a massive game with a ton of minis and cards and chits and all this other stuff. And plus, I had my full-time job, and I wanted to make sure it was done well. So I was like, let's shelve this other big thing and let's make something small. And then let's prove that we can be successful. Let's learn everything we can from doing a small project before we move on to something larger. So
I love Bullfrogs. I got it when it came out shortly afterwards. And I love the idea of it moving around. I remember being really, really fascinated with it. We haven't played it for a while, but it's still in the collection. That's a good one.
We just released a digital version of it on iOS and Android and Steam earlier this year. Yeah, it was just basically a friend of a friend's like, I'm a web developer. I have never published anything outside of like congregate.com, but I want to work on a project and I don't want it to just be a throwaway. Hey, Keith, can I do a version of Bullfrogs? I was like, okay, sure, go for it. So that's kind of how that started. And then, it was one guy, and a year later, it was actually over a year later, it came out. It's like one of those things where like the game's out of print. I don't think it's ever coming back. Maybe someday, I don't know. But it was.
Well, you did do a second version. You did a second edition, right?
Well, I had
didn't you
sold out of the first print run, and I was like moving on to the next project or two, thinking about blend off, thinking about role player, and I basically was introduced to Scott Gaeta from Renegade because he had signed a few games from King Klenko, who's a friend of mine, who does like Fuse, and he did some other games for Renegade. And so he introduced me at Gen Con, and I said, hey, I've got this game. I don't know what to do with it. It's almost out of print. And hey, do you guys want to pick it up? Take it out, basically take it, to the next level. So they were kind of like, man, I don't know. And then they played it and they really liked it.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, sure, let's do it. So they made a decision to kind of reoriented the box vertical instead of horizontal. They changed the box size. They did the cover work, the cover artwork. Jackie Davis came in and did a new cover for it. And I think Renegade was kind of trying to hit a different target market with it the second time around. And I would say it was probably moderately successful for them. But at the end of the day, they let it go and reverted it back to me. So I do have the rights for have the rights for Bullfrogs, and I own all the artwork. So all my licensing agreements are work for hire for art. So at the end of the day, I own the artwork and I can kind of do whatever I want with it. So that allows me to, I did a set of puzzles last year, so I can kind of reuse the art for that. Or I can do, in my next game, I can use something that's in the role player universe. I can use some pieces of art from a previous role player game and slot it in somewhere to kind of give it a level of cohesion.
So maybe we'll have a Bullfrogs roll and write game or something like that coming out at some point.
I have fun with it. If I did release Bullfrogs again, like maybe I need to kind of slot it into the role player world and like do a little bit of retheming on it to make it feel part of that universe.
The Frogkins. Right, that would work perfectly.
I know, right? Yeah. So it's interesting. I think it's like some font changes and like rewrite the fluff on it, and then we could slot it into the role player universe and just slap a role player tail underneath it, and then there'll be all these people who can be introduced to this game that came out whatever, like 12 years ago or 10 years ago, and we've never heard of it. That's the interesting thing about board games is that people are always entering the hobby. And I talked to people about, we played Amun-Ra, and people were like, I never even heard of that game. It's like, well, there was at one point when this game was a big deal, but like that was before you were part of the scene, So I feel old whenever people say that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, me too.
It's interesting that you mentioned like the universe and talking about how you license like the artwork. It sounds like that's a really great setup for a system like Role Player Adventures, where maybe you wind up creating a campaign world or a campaign universe at some point, and it's like if you create, I don't know if you're familiar with D&D at all, Dungeons and Dragons, but like if you create a character like, I know that was a really softball question.
That's a good question, which I want to get to. But anyway, go on.
Right, but like I didn't want to bury the lead there. But like if you create a character like Drizzt Do'Urden, and you didn't own the artwork, right? Like, how do you create like these anchors in a world that showcase like the system, the experience, if you can't do that? So that's a pretty interesting way of setting it up.
Right. I mean, it's been interesting because the original role player artwork and the whole kind of perspective was like, some of it was coming from working on Call of Duty, where it's like, you know, in Call of Duty, your character doesn't talk so that players can feel like they are that player. So then when I was working on role player, like I wanted it to kind of be as generic as possible so people could kind of put themselves in whatever character they're building. And then, but when it comes to like building a world, it's all about being as specific as possible, right? It's like, so then we made this shift over time of like being generic and then sliding into very specific. So, you know, if you've played role player adventures, you'll know the guy on the cover of role player, he has a name now. When we made the artwork, he didn't, but now he does, and he has a backstory. You know, he's Sir Ferric, and he's, you know, you can find out some things about that character, or like the little rogue character on the front of role player. Like you meet him at the very first adventure in Role Player Adventures, but before that, we started writing those. You know, whatever, 5 years later, it was just the generic rogue guy. But now he's Tarek Nowlin, and he's sassy, and he's a fun character to get to know. So it's I think of it as like we had this, you know, we had this blank canvas and things were sketched in, and now we're like adding all these details, which is super fun. You know? So
yeah, so that makes me think like so much of game design is about storytelling. It's this weird mix of visuals, you know, this physical experience, creating an experience that players encounter or experience as a story, I guess, and art, right?
Yeah.
But role player adventures, and we're kind of jumping ahead, I guess, into what your most recent title is, but that's really about storytelling. Is that right? I've not played it yet.
I mean, 100%. So there was, there weren't, originally when, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there weren't that many story-heavy driven games in board gaming.
Yeah.
There were the games that I thought of that I thought were like very narrative or in like strength of character and things like that were Battlestar Galactica. I mean, you also had the background of having seen the show, so you kind of have all these kind of feelings going into the game. Or something like Last Night on Earth from Flying Frog Productions, where like you would play this game and you had a scenario, and afterwards, excuse me, and then afterwards you had this story to tell of like, I searched the graveyard and I found the gasoline and I threw it in the truck and we, zoomed off, and you had a story to tell after the game. But in most of the time, when you sat down to play a board game, you don't really come off with that much of a story. I wouldn't say that storytelling was a big deal. And for me, like when I saw what Red Raven was doing with, Above and Below, and then eventually Near and Far, and then I saw kind of a resurgence, at least in my little corner of my mind, a resurgence of game books. I started looking into them again. I started looking at the Lone Wolf books, and I started playing all these kind of narrative experiences that weren't just choose your own adventure, but they actually had some mechanics attached to them. And I felt like Ryan over at Red Raven had kind of are pushing into that region for board gaming, and I was super excited. I was like, if I'm going to do a narrative game, like, I want to do something like that. Like, that's genius.
Right.
So I took a lot of inspiration from that. And then there was a lot of pushing of like the game of role players about making a fantasy character, and that's it. But there's this very strong drive for people to do something with this character.
All right.
And like the number of times that I've gotten that feedback from people is
Keith, that exactly, right? Like, so like I had a group of friends. We had this thing called Snarnia. Like I get together with a bunch of friends from the United States, and we just we do legal things in Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. Okay. We call it Snarnia Con. Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia.
I'm with you.
All right. But they had never played Dungeons and Dragons before, and we wanted to do a 5th edition one shot. And so what I did is I had 2 groups of people play role player, and they created their characters.
Right.
And then I came up with very easy rules because like 99% of the work is done already for converting class to class,
right,
race to race, and 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And we played a frigging one shot. So like that exactly right there.
Right.
Like we want to do things. And it was an incredible bridge for me to have people who had never played Dungeons and Dragons before create fully usable characters with nothing missing.
Right.
Yeah.
Like so many people like say they're gonna do that, or they like, oh, you could totally do that. Nobody actually does it. But the truth is, Myron is the guy who does.
Yes,
yes,
did that
there you
shit.
go.
Like it was awesome. Like Anna. Okay, my wife Anna. Mm-hmm. She played like a lawful evil paladin that was like killing people, you know, for penance. And she would never have tried that kind of character. Restrictions, right. Like having to have like rules and like, you know, break rules. It just really added
thing that I like so much about role players. That like, there's, you know, you end up with a character at the end that you can look at and like come up with like a lot of details about afterwards. Like there's so many of this kind of mix and match of cards and skills, traits and stuff that like you can kind of put it together in your head, and that's kind of a fun exercise. And then the next step is like, okay, if I put this character together in my head after seeing all the stuff, like what kind of adventures would they go on? Mm-hmm. That's the piece that you put in there. That's cool. Yeah. So basically, Roleplay Adventures became my response to that question. I mean, even when I was first designing the game, I got that feedback all the time, and I was dug in. I was like, I'm not making an adventure game. If you want to play adventures at the time, it was like, go play Descent, go play Mice and Mystics, go play whatever. There's tons of games that do that. I want to do something different. You don't understand. And eventually I was like, well, I got to come up with my own answer. And I knew after seeing the above and below stuff and like kind of where I would have done that kind of work. And I was like, man, I'm not a great writer, right? So that's not my trade. I would need somebody who's like a great writer. Even like, I don't want to throw shade on anybody's work that they've done in board games, but I've never really played a narrative board game that I said, dang, the writing is really good in this game. Like, I've never felt that way before, but I want people to feel that when they play my game. So, you know, I found a writer who was a friend, that he was excited about the project. And I had this conversation with him. I said, because he was like, I got this great idea. Let's do a narrative game where you can, you know, use your role player character. I was like, I never thought of that before.
Yeah, I've heard that a few times.
Me, but I need somebody to do it with me. He's like, well, I'm a writer. I was like, mm-hmm. So I was like, you know, this is going to take us like 3 years. Are you ready to commit to that? And he's like, yes. I was like, okay, here we go. So we made some prototypes. We figured out together kind of what the design was going to be and how the narrative was going to work, because, you know, the mechanical design and the narrative piece of it is so intertwined that it was like we were in lockstep together. And like, I didn't want to have this kind of the other game that people talked about as being really narrative was Arkham Horror, which I always want to love that game, but it does not create a cohesive story. There's like little snippets of story that like don't really work together, and it kind of always leaves me wanting like a more kind of cohesive narrative experience. So, and also there was this big uprise of video games. Like there was those Walking Dead video games where they gave you choices.
Right.
It's like, oh, do you want to kill this guy or this guy? And afterwards you just exit the building and you kind of continue along the story. It gives you this feeling like these decisions are going to be really impactful to the story. And guess what? They're really not that big a deal. And that always was a letdown for me. So I was like, I want a board game where those choices do matter, and there are dramatic changes in what happens based on the player's choices, because that just feels powerful, and that's a fun feeling. So that was definitely a focus for that game.
And so it seems like there's like more of a shift to there being a campaign where, I want to see what happens to this character, after they get the pot of gold. What do they do next? Like, do I get to retire? Do I get to make up some additional piece of the story, and maybe like in some ways add this character to the world?
Right. I mean, it's been really fun to make connections, because as we worked on Role Player Adventures for so long, we released other games in the meantime. So there's mention of King Terran, which is like he's mentioned, I think, in the fluff text for I think one of the Role Player expansions. I want to say it's Monsters and Minions, but he's like a character that you meet in Role Player Adventures. In Cartographers, there's a card that says the Golden Hope Tavern, and when you play Role Player Adventures, there's a weapon called the Golden Hope, and so there's all these connections to try to create like this cohesive world, and just like let people have that aha moment for like, oh yeah, remember da 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 da. So that brings me lots of joy of like creating these things that all interconnect, and like developing the relationships, and like figuring out what the world timeline is and all this stuff, and to the point in which like it was we were getting we had multiple writers working on it, and we just ended up doing I ended up creating like a Wikipedia page, a wiki for the team, so that like people weren't writing the same character in different ways, or forgetting about details about certain characters,
right?
And that helped us along the way. There was a couple. There's actually one of those things that slipped through, which I regret a little bit, but that's fine.
Easter egg hunt.
Easter egg hunt. Yeah, exactly.
You heard it first here, y'all. Well, probably not first.
There's this one character that shows up twice. One in like at the beginning of Adventure 7 or something, and then he also appears in the side quest, which, and in one location I think we describe him as human, and the other one we describe him as an elf, which is just genuinely just a mistake. But I think on the wiki I put an entry in there that said sometimes disguises himself as an elf as a joke.
There you go. It's all solvable.
Yeah. I was like, either that or he's a half elf.
Right. Just
the trick of the light,
Yeah.
Well, that's going to happen when you're building such a big, rich, and wild world with all these things. I remember hearing or reading. Sorry, I was just going to say, I remember hearing that when George R. R. Martin was writing Game of Thrones, as the books came out, I was a big fan. Everybody loved it. And then the TV show came out and he just blew up to stardom, and people who'd never read the books went back and read it by the millions. And somebody found the name of somebody's horse had changed a couple of times throughout the book. And I was just like, it's a tiny little detail, but it's going to happen, right? I mean, the more your world grows and as rich as it gets,
right?
You're going
to miss the idea of having a depository for all the official information, like that didn't like come to me until we were like 4/5 done with it.
Oh really?
And there's still like I still need I need to go back and comb through some of those later books and add some of the data there so that everything's there. But I did a count, I think, when we were running the Kickstarter page, people were like asking, somebody asked, or maybe one of the licensing, like international licensing partner was like asking how many words that were in the game, and I did the Control A word count for all the documents, and I put them in the spreadsheet. I was like, "There's over 440,000 words in this."
Wow!
Game.
Wow!
I was like,
"Wow!"
And the desire is to put out a perfect product, right? That's perfection is always the target. And I was like, no matter what we do, there will be typos in here. There will be like a branching error somewhere. Like it's just going to happen.
Sure.
And so that's been, and it's been true, and the community has been happy to point those out to me.
Happy to point them out.
But so I've been tracking. You know, I've got a FAQ up, and I've got like the things that people need to know now. And then they're like, oh, the spacing on this one page is a little weird. That goes on a different document. So like, there's probably
right.
There's probably at least 250 changes that we'll make on the reprint to try to clean it up as much as we can. And I'm sure as soon as you press the print button, you'll get somebody will have another one.
Well, now that you've mentioned it, I think there's going to be someone who creates a role player wiki and just does
the one that I wrote is
it online?
Public. Yeah.
Oh, it's a public one. Oh, nice. Wow.
Nice. It was private. Wow. And then we released this document to the Kickstarter backers that were like, it's pretty extensive. Like, this is how you write a role player adventure. So like, we want people to take the materials that we've given you and make your own cool stuff. You can reuse all the stuff that I've done. And then as more stuff comes out, you can use that, or you can build your own. I gave out templates to build cards and stuff. So
yeah,
if you go to www.worldofulos.com, you can see all the ridiculousness that we've been putting together.
Nice. Definitely. We'll put that in the show notes so people can find that easily.
Cool.
So I guess that I have so many questions that I want to ask. I'm just kind of trying to quickly prioritize them. So Thunderworks, you said you publish about half your own games and half other people's games. What's it like designing a game that you design for a different company? Because I know Skulk is one of them. And then how does it work for designing for yourself? What's the main differences there?
Well, Skulk is kind of a special project, right? So Eduardo Barat from Pencil First Games is a friend of mine. We met through online conversations about, hey, when you're doing crowdfunding, how would you do this? Like, it's just me. I just ask people a lot of questions, right? So if I try to drill in and learn as much as I can from people, especially people who are experts in something that I want to do. So we had become friends, and he asked me to, we recollect this story differently, Ed and I.
And that's always good.
Yeah, and he asked me, my version is that he was looking for someone to do a solo design for Herbaceous. And we'd been chatting, and I said, let me take a shot at it. And I basically worked on the weekend on it because I had some extra time. And he liked it. So then that became the official one. And then it still is probably his most well-known title. And so then Ed wanted to kind of repeat that process of like, let's get the band back together. Steve Finn on design and Beth Sobel on art, and Keith's going to come in and do the solo mode. So I think I've done 5 solo modes for him for his game, something crazy like that. So Herbaceous Sprouts, Sunset Over Water, Floriferous, and there's probably one I'm not remembering. But anyway, but Roleplayer had not blown up yet. I had a kind of a meager, maybe respectable Kickstarter. I think Roleplayer had done $52,000 on Kickstarter, and it was enough for me to print like 1,500, 2,000 copies. I was like, I worked really hard on it. It was done better than any of my previous projects, but it wasn't like this monster project like you see now on some of these other publishers. So I felt like I had some time, and Ed came to me and said, hey, I've got this idea. I've been working on it. Me and my kid have been working on it, but I kind of want somebody to take it over. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. I was like, if I just have to design it and I can just give it back to you, then I don't have to do all the publishing work, which to me is like 90% of the work. I was like, that's awesome. I can get another game done. So then I designed that for him, and then I did some much more play testing with him, and then it was his most successful Kickstarter project. And then, of course, if you have a successful project, you want to do more. So then it turns into the next game, which is called Maul Peak, which is about to go on Kickstarter, I think April 5th. We've been working on that. We've been working on stuff that's supposed to happen past that. So, but then in the meantime, Roleplayer becomes big, and then now I quit my job and I'm working on all these other projects, and he knows that like he caught me at a time in which like I could say yes, but if he asked me again, I would never be able to say yes again.
Right.
ever.
Yeah, so I've been kind of backing away from that project a little bit. Like, we have a new developer that's on board, and he took on a lot more responsibility in the second game. I kind of did the initial design, and he's been doing all the play testing and kind of tweaking and polishing. And then for future projects, I'll probably have him do even more work. But I got a company to run at this point, and I've got more people I'm responsible for. And if I'm working on a game, it needs to be something that's going to be a Thunderworks title, so that I can, really back it myself, and it'll be all in my tastes. And it's interesting that the the artwork for that game was Dustin Faust, who's a great artist, and Ed had worked with him before, but his style was so different than anything that I've ever done. And I was like, I don't know if this is the right guy, dude. It's good, but I would never do this artwork. And then, but as trust me, I think I can kind of push him in the right direction. And he did, and it turned out looking amazing.
It does look great. It has one of the best logos. I'm a graphic designer. I do a lot of logo work, and the box cover for Skulk Hollow and the logo itself is just fantastic.
Yeah,
it's quite good.
Like Ed and I, at this, we do a weekly friendship call, basically. Like we just call you. We have a scheduled call. We just talk business, talk shop, kind of see how each other are doing. Especially during the pandemic, it was something I really looked forward to. It was I know this 1 hour of my day once a week, I don't really have to worry about anything else, and I can just kind of talk to one of my friends, and that's been really nice. And he gives me lots of advice of what I should be doing with my company and stuff. But and he always jokes about how everything that Keith touches turns to gold, but it's over there. So he's a little self-depreciating there, but whatever. So that's how kind of Skulk Hollow happened, and I enjoy working on that project, but I really need to focus on my Thunderworks stuff most of the time. In terms, you asked about designing
for yourself and for someone else. Yeah.
So I have not done a whole lot of design for myself in the last few years. I focus a lot on role-player adventures, but I haven't really, besides working on the Skulk Hollow stuff, I haven't done a lot of my own design. And part of that is just it's hard to be a designer and a publisher at the same time, especially if you want to publish 3 to 4 titles a year, like we talked about. So,
which do you prefer? Do you have a preference? You've said the publishing side is the meat of what the work is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that you love it. That might be how you can make money doing it. But is that,
and it's something I'm good at, I think. I think there was some self-doubt after the success of Role Player of the sophomore slump. If I can design a Role Player, can I design another game that's just as good?
Right.
And to me, Skulk Hollow was kind of a way to put out another game that wouldn't be as easily compared to Role Player because people, a lot of people really love that game. So I think there was some fear there, and then and also during the pandemic, it's it's hard to play test stuff. I really don't like playing stuff online. I really like playing in person, and I don't have that many close. I had a regular playtest group, of course, that went away during COVID. Yeah. That's starting back up, which is really exciting. So I've been doing more development, in terms of I get other people's games and I adjust them to be more in line with how I like games to work. So I have an influence on the games, but I'd like to do more of just here's my crazy idea. Let's see if we can make this a cool game. I do like designing, and I think I'll be able to do more design work in the next year or so as a result of kind of bringing on the Kirk earlier this year, who's kind of taking over a lot of the stuff that I was doing, paying invoices and doing market analysis and working with logistics companies. The's taking over big chunks of that.
That's good.
And it's this is a weight off my shoulders. This is amazing. And so now they're looking to me to make the next great game that everybody gets to market and work on. So the kind of idea of embracing that role as the creative, not just the guy that does everything, but now it's push away everything else so that I can be the creative in-house designer and developer and just focus on the games, not so much all the other stuff, which can bog down your time real quick. So
sure.
I want to do more design. I'm going to do more design. And so we'll see. I'm hoping like a year from now, I've got like 3 brand new designs that have been well play tested, and we can slide those into the schedule. Definitely thinking about the schedule. You know, I've got stuff. I have 13 games in flight right now, right? So I've got and only 2 of them are mine. So a matter of like, I know that if I come up with a great design, like I'm not going to be able to bring it to market for at least 2 years, maybe more.
So it seems like you made the decision to hire adults so that you can play more.
Right.
Like that's right. Like that. You know, like the CEO of Best Buy, that was kind of his strategy. Like he hired adults to run the store, the company, while he just went and followed the dopamine. And so, not surprisingly, Best Buy for a long time was and is very innovative in a crowded field. And I advocate for people, particularly people who are very creative and love the idea of playing with ideas and building amazing experiences, buying themselves, you know, with success, of course, buying themselves room to play.
Right. Yeah. And like, it's taken me a couple of years to figure this out. But like all these other companies have had the same experience. Like, I'm sure I probably could have like trimmed that down some if like I'd done a little bit more research or I talked to the right person or something. But it took it was really difficult to like sit down and start working on something, or say, okay, I'm going to ignore these emails that are coming in, you know, like once every 5 minutes all day long about random things that I need to pay attention to, and just like shut that down and just allow myself to have ideas and explore them and prioritize playing with these things instead of solving some random problem. Because, you know, when I see a problem, my gut instinct is to solve it as fast as I can, so I can move on to the next thing. And now I've got some other people that can solve those problems for me, and I can start playing some more.
Yeah, I think that's the natural sort of progression for, we work with a lot of small businesses, and I think that's sort of the natural progression as you really focus on customer service and quality control, and your tendency is to, I'm going to do it all myself, I'm going to do it all myself. And then there comes this time where it's like, I need to offload some of these less interesting things to me, to someone who has skills to handle them. And as such, I'm going to focus on the things that I'm good at and the things that will make my company grow and will make me feel better about it. So that's pretty common. I don't think
I know it's like, why? Like, I don't know. I should have taken more business classes at school or something.
Well, you know, and the funny thing about it too is just like with the writer, I forgot his name, is like you'll just be talking to your buddy. Like here's how a conversation recently went between Chris and I. Man, dude, like this designer I'm using to do my designs, is the design is really great, but like things are, you know, I can't plan anything because everything comes down behind schedule. Like whether I was like, you know, it'd be cool if you change this thing. That's not a big deal, right? And the person takes 5 days to change it because I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm like complaining to Chris, and it's like, oh, you do that. And so now we're talking about like in more times, you know, more often than not, it's probably just like friends talking about this problem, and they're like, "Oh, you do that? All right, well, yeah, like I trust you, so why don't you do that for me?" And I can, you know,
that is, you know, I couldn't say it better for sure. That's exactly how it happens. You know, like, you know, me hiring Kirk to take over a lot of this logistical stuff, like he ran Peacekeeper Games here in town. And, you know, I was sitting with him and play tested Rurik Donna Kiev with him the first time with Stan Kordonsky, the designer, and I said, "This is a great game. I'm too busy to publish this. You should," and he did. And you know, he's done everything that I've done in terms of being a designer and a small publisher. But he had a response of like wanting to step away because his family was becoming more of a focus, and some of those projects were pretty challenging. And then and at one point we talked about like merging our companies together, and then in the end I kind of backed away from that. And then 3-4 years later, he's like, "Hey, what if I just come work for you?" I was like, I mean, he's got a ton of experience. He's a good friend of mine. I trust him, you know, with my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it still took me 6 months to say yes, because I'm scared of change. You know, change is scary. Risk is scary. When you bring somebody on, you know, I've never hired anybody besides my wife before. So then there's all these kind of accounting and, you know, payroll complications that I don't know anything about. So it's scary. And then, and then there's that risk. You bring them on and it's like, they obviously want a living wage. You know, can I really afford to pay them that? Because I'm too busy fighting fires. I don't really know. You know, I'm like, I think we'd be okay. So, actually Kirk like sat down with me and like forced me to like spell out a bunch of numbers, look up a ton of numbers to prove to me that I could afford to hire him.
Wow.
That's like, great.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I don't, so I'm indebted
Talk
to
about creating your own job. Talk about creating your own job. That's good. Yeah. And anyway, now you're going to benefit, and so are we, because we're going to get 2 or 3 maybe Keith Matejka games coming out in the near future.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our discussion with Keith Matejka. There was so much to talk about that we had to break this episode into 2 parts. Please stay tuned and come back for part 2 of our discussion. Thanks for listening to Board Game Chats with Chris and Myron. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, check out their website at boardgamechats.com, or drop them an email at boardgamechats@gmail.com. You can also find Board Game Chats on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.